Now, there are lots of deals out there in FPV at the moment, but one of them isn't this. I don't know if you guys have seen this, and hello, welcome to the live stream. We're going to start with the new T-Motor 8-in-1 stack, which is their Cine F7 60 amp 6S stack, which is available for £358 in the UK. Now, that is some stack, if I'm honest. Integrated, stable structure, full connector design, shell with high efficiency heat dissipation, built-in ESC filter capacitor, Bluetooth, and multiple mounting holes. That is a beast of a thing, and it's a STM32F722. But man, the price. The price. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another live stream. Yes, it's Sunday night, and it's time to talk about some things as always. And it's been quite an interesting week because, yes, I put a video out earlier on TBS, and I'm going to touch on it a little bit in this stream. I have the video on it, and I'm not going to go into too much more in this one. But I do feel it is a very interesting subject, and more actually the subject of what trappy sort of means and my personal hopes for we end up with it as well, and almost actually quite interesting to see what you guys think. And if you haven't seen, I do have a dedicated video on this already, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. We're also gonna talk a bit about remote ID spoofing, because this has become quite the subject, and I don't fully understand all of the interest around this, if I'm honest, because my thoughts on RID, and I put a video out about that as well the other day, is fairly straightforward. You know, look, you have your legal obligation, and then you have what you want to do. And I'm not really sure of the point of spoofing overall. For me, I think it comes down to just either complying or not, and we'll talk about that a bit more there too. But we'll also take a bit of a look at some of the spoofing solutions that are available, including the Squid RID, or Squid, whatever we're going to call it, Squidrid, I think it's called. And the fact that you can actually install it on an ExpressLRS transmitter, because it's an ESP32. I've just been using this as my test platform actually for doing it. And we might take a bit of a look at that in a minute as well. And as always, we'll talk about any subjects that come up along the way. Now, I'm going to say hello to everyone in the chat. Hello, Captain Bry. How are you? GMI, good evening, good evening. Hello to everyone who was here at the start. Craig, Cool Cat was here. Smags FPV was early doors as well. And everyone else, I hope you're all safe and well. I'm going to also say hello to everyone in my Discord, because I always miss this. There is actually a live chat section in my Discord server, and I always completely miss this because I'm a terrible YouTuber, and I always miss this. So it is here for any of my folks on the Discord server. If you don't know, I do have a Discord. I'm not going to say it's worth checking it out. It's free. You can come join, say hello, and it is there. But I am going to keep an eye on it just in case someone does say something tonight. And as always, if you guys do have any questions, please do put them in the chat. I will try and answer them. Super chats are welcome, but they are certainly not needed, but they do help the channel along. And I've just noticed again, for the third week running since rebuilding my PC, I need to fix the setting that is affecting the keyframes in OBS. I keep forgetting to do it, and then I stream, and then I get the error. And I need to be reminded of this. Someone who's on my Discord server, do me a favor, remind me to fix this, will you? I keep forgetting. So hello to everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. Now, it's been quite an interesting week. And whilst we are in a bit of a quieter period from a hardware point of view, and that isn't to say it's completely quiet, because there has been some new stuff on analog, big 5-watt VTX released this week as well. Things are a little bit quieter overall. We have had the new HDZero Race version 3 VTX. It should be in this box here. Yes, it is. For those who haven't seen it, again, I will say I do have a video on this. It went out Wednesday. If I go to the overhead and let me, woohoo, come in. Ooh, let me focus, because we're out of focus. If you haven't seen, there is a Race version 3 VTX now. My camera will sort itself out in a moment, folks. Give it 1 second. Come on. Come on. Thank you very much. There we go. So we do have the version 3 Race. This is a new, smaller VTX, lighter, better quality build overall. There's no new features here with this with regards to HDZero. You know, there's nothing specifically new on this. It's just a smaller, lighter platform, more integrated. They've moved one of the ICs onto the back, better component layout, and just overall more reliable, thicker PCB, more glue on the components. Nothing new, you know, nothing feature-wise specifically new, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It is to replace the Race version 2. And again, it's good to see HDZero continue to develop. It was quite interesting, because I did see people say, well, hold on a minute, HDZero released this just after Fox Ear have released their HDZero VTX. And if you don't know, and I should have brought that one up actually, Fox Ear have released a Race VTX, which is very much based on the Race version 2. Now, the reason I think we've ended up in this position is that that Fox Ear one was talked about like forever ago. And it seems to have taken a lifetime to come to fruition. Here it is. It is their Fox Ear HDZero Digital VTX Race Edition. This really only landed in the market a few months ago. Not even that, if I'm honest. But HDZero have now done this Race version 3. But the reality is they've been working on these VTXs for quite a long time. And it's hardly surprising in the time these guys took to get this out that HDZero have done something themselves. So, look, it is what it is. But the new Race version 3 is available. I'm not going to pretend it's exciting, because it's not. What I did also get, though, is the Wi-Fi module for the goggles. And I've been testing that a little bit this week, and there will be a dedicated video coming on that in the future as well. It's hard for me to say it's, you know, oh my God, this is amazing, because it isn't. What it is a generation by generation improvement over what we've had before. No performance improvement, just durability more than anything. Mr. Huggy, in the Chris Rogers of video testing VTXs, he found HDZero Race VTX was more like 400 milliwatts of power. Okay, look, this is a subject I wasn't going to get on too much. And I'll say this. Chris is a friend of mine. Chris is fantastic. I love Chris. And in fact, I knew about his video before it was published. Me and Chris talk a lot in the background. Right. But I've said this, what I'm going to say now, to Chris as well. I personally don't think you should take any stock in the numbers that Chris has given you. Measuring signals is extremely complicated. They are not done the same for certification testing as they are by manufacturers, they are by us. I'm not saying Chris's test methods are wrong. He's using an interesting way of doing it. I personally looked into this direct method myself with a £7,000 RF sensor. I looked at some very high-end solutions, and I was told by one of the very big companies who makes these things that it is just not worth it unless you're using a certified piece of test equipment. Even the 6,000 and 7,000 RF power sensors from the likes of Keysight are not necessarily going to measure in the same way and give you an accurate number that you can use. Now, the way Chris is doing it is a legitimate method. It's actually how those RF power sensors generally work. What you're doing is dumping that RF into a load that generates heat, and as a result of that, you're measuring that, and that's what that sensor is doing. However, number one, his method is not calibrated against the official methods of doing it. Number two, that isn't actually how they measure it for CE or FCC certification as well. That's done with generally about a £30,000–35,000 VNA network analyzer, vector network analyzer, if you don't know what that is. And it has a special mode for certification. And what they then actually do is force the transmitter into a very specific state, and they measure based on that state, and that is what they define the power levels at. Now, I'm not saying the numbers Chris are showing are wrong, but what you have to understand is they're not calibrated against a known method, a golden sample. They're not done the same way, and they're completely arbitrary. Now, are they relevant in the fact of measuring VTX A, B, and C to the same output? So if you take, could you measure a HDZero VTX version 1, 2, and 3? Yes, absolutely. But what you can't then do is run off and say that is absolutely more or less than DJI. There are so many factors here. And I think what Chris did amazingly well in that video is put together a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in videos and other people have talked about in videos. You know, I've brought up in my RF testing about EIRP, you know, DJI's all CE and FCC certification is EIRP. That includes the antenna gain. There is also a lot of variation in those results. So just to give you an idea, in the official test results of the DJI O3 system, they allow for plus minus 2.5 dB of variation. Now, just to give you an idea, plus or minus 2.5 dB can be the difference between 800 milliwatts and 1200 milliwatts. There is so much involved here. Chris's testing is absolutely interesting. And look, I did this months ago with my spectrum analyzer, and I actually have an image of all my own tests. I've shared them on my Discord, but I made a conscious decision last year not to discuss RF power when I cannot absolutely, without doubt, give you a number that is reliable, and that number is comparable to what you would expect from the manufacturer, because my personal preference is it is going to cause confusion. I have been here before. You know, I've put data out before that people have questioned, and I've put data out that people go, okay, well, why is that not right? You know, unless you're going to do it in the same way they're doing it, all you're doing is bringing into question yours or their data, and it just answers more questions than it solves. So here's an interesting example of that. In the testing, the Vista outputs less RF power with the O3 firmware than it does the DJI original V1 firmware. However, the reason for that is unknown. Chris hypothesized that he thinks DJI did it so it wouldn't give the same performance or it wouldn't be better. But also take this logic into account. DJI put a maximum limit of range on the Vista of 30 kilometers compared to the O3 of 23.4 kilometers. So if DJI wanted to limit the Vista, they would just limit it in RF range because they can, not in RF power. So I think you've got to be careful. It's easy to make a lot of assumptions, and I'm terrible for it. I'm really bad for doing it. But we have to try and stick to facts. And the video is fantastic. He really did put together a lot of things in one place that I'm a bit annoyed about that I haven't done. I've discussed everything there across about 30 videos. If you look at the Avatar HD videos, if you look at this video or that video, we've covered it all over the years. EIRP, the power levels, and all of this stuff. And what I decided was keep it comparable. So, is Avatar's power level comparable largely to DJI's? Yes. So I have no interest in the actual number than that. It's pointless. It's just pointless because they have different range limitations anyway. An interesting one when we're talking about RF power is it wouldn't matter if DJI outputted 3 times the power from a range point of view than Avatar because it's limited in range. So that's the problem with it. So look, it's a hugely complicated subject. And I may, those are on my Discord. I've discussed this on live streams. I literally was that much off buying a $6,000. I had sourced a calibrated, tested RF power meter, which costs $6,000, and I had a bit of a deal on it, and I was willing to punt that money down if it gave me the data. And after talking with Keysight and a couple of other companies, they just said don't, because it's not going to give you what you want. If you're going to pop down $37K on one of our VNAs and pay then probably another $10,000 to have it calibrated to meet FCC certification X, Y, and Z, and then set up your testing setup to be exactly the same as the lab, and then create your own golden sample, then go for it. But other than that, it's close to not worth it. I'm not saying the data is interesting, because it is. But the difference between 200 watts on one system to another is pointless, largely. We know overall they behave comparable. There are too many different factors involved with regards to whether it's using MIMO or MIMO, whether it's using directional or straight antennas. And Chris does a great job of explaining, look, we talk about omnidirectional antennas can be 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5 dB of gain, whereas you're talking potentially 10 dB of gain. So for instance, we can be talking 10 dB of gain on that antenna compared to 1.5 dB gain on that antenna. And it just gets very, very complicated and difficult. And it's really hard to explain to people that the RF power in itself really isn't necessarily the important factor. And then you can go down the rabbit hole of antenna efficiency, SWR, or S11, as it actually is. Because remember, you could be pumping 1,200 watts into an antenna, or 1,000 watts into an antenna, but if it's only 80% efficient, then you're only going to be getting 800 watts out the other side. And then if the antenna has a really poor radiating pattern, it's still going to behave terribly compared to an antenna that actually has a nice linear overall behavior with low levels of gain but high efficiency. It is just such a complicated subject. RF power on its own, for me, is just not important anymore, other than having a rough idea what the system is doing. And that's my stance on it. And I said, it is a fantastic video, and I think Chris really did a great job of putting out a video that explains everything in one place. What I don't agree with is facts around RF power measurement when we're not measuring in the same way. And that's nothing to do with Chris. It's just my opinion on RF power measurement. And that's why I haven't done it. And that's the real specific reason I haven't done it. I have probably 400 gigs worth of RF testing content I have never published, because I just felt it wasn't worth the rabbit hole it goes down. And that's it. And that's my thoughts on that. And look, people may not agree. Chris will agree. But that's overall why of that. But look, Chris is banging out some amazing videos at the moment. He's done he's going to be doing battery testing soon, which there is irony on. And it's this subject, and I don't know how many are live watching. Yeah, you call those special videos the RF testing videos. Yeah, I don't know how many are here on the Discord. And the irony was, there's been a big subject on battery testing on my Discord server. This was about a month ago we started this, and we actually mapped out a whole process on how I would do it if I was going to do it. And I didn't realize at the same time Chris Rosser was looking at it. So I'm just going to back off and not bother, because I'm not going to put my time into something that someone else is already looking to do as well. But we discussed it heavily on my Discord server. And I was I'd worked out what I was going to do, how I was going to do it. We were actually looking at data loggers as well for measuring each of the cells, and how we would create a simulated FPV run. So you do that on an Arduino or something like that. And actually I came up with the thought of, I was actually going to put a quad in a box and actually run the quad with a Arduino doing the testing. The load would actually be a quad. I was going to put an actual quad on for load. And we come up with all of this stuff, and then I found out Chris is going to go down that road, and I believe JB's sending him a tester, so yeah, I'll just step out of it. There's no point me getting involved in it, but it is a super interesting subject. It really is. But it's funny, like, those of us who do the more technical side of things, we're all sort of hovering around the same things. Do you know what I mean? With regards to the RF power of HDZero, there is an absolute massive difference in HDZero. And I think I've even shown this in a video. I've definitely shown this. I think this is in the RF power meter video I did. There has been a huge difference with HDZero between R1 and R8. We've known this. This has always been known. It's fairly well known on the HDZero Discord. But again, it's funny that you get new people coming into content who haven't necessarily seen the background stuff or the stuff that's been done. We've always known that all of these systems output the maximum RF power roughly on R1. And it's really simple. These RF power amplifiers are basically designed for Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi doesn't quite push up at 6 gigs. It does, but it's not the standard channel. So as a result, these amps are generally tuned for about 5.6 to 5.8 gigs peak. And that's when you get the very best output from them. And that's why we've seen it on the HDZeros, on the DJIs, that you're getting a bit more power down the bottom end, because that's where they're tuned. What you will also find, though, is you're then going to start looking at, it's not just about what channel is best for the RF power, it's then about what channel is also best for the antenna. Because remember, your antenna's S11 or your SWR comes into this, and your antenna might actually be tuned for R3 or 4. And this is, again, where that efficiency issue comes in. Are you going to pump in as much RF power as you can at R1, but then lose some of that because you're out of the efficiency band of the antenna? Therefore, you're not going to get the best performance. Or are you better going in with slightly less RF power on R4, say, but be at the peak, low SWR on the antenna with the maximum efficiency, and then you're going to get the best possible range. So again, it's really not as simple as just saying, stick it in R1 and you're going to get the best performance. It also depends on what your antenna is tuned for. For instance, if your antenna was tuned for like 5.9 gigs, R1 could be burning power away in inefficiency. I would agree, though, it's just going lower is better. A safe area, R1 to R4, is going to be your peak performance area on most antennas, on most setups. Yeah, R1 to R4 is going to be that's what you will find in that band. You're going to have your VTX on the maximum output, and your antenna should be tuned in that area as well, predominantly. For hobbyists like me, it's a case of trial and error in the same area. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Probably a happy medium would be R3. I bet 90% of people could go onto R3 and probably get the best performance. Because that you're hedging your bets there. You're hedging your bets. So that's my unscripted thing on Chris. As I said, it's a fantastic video. I think I'm a bit disappointed I didn't put one together as whole as that. I've done it on antennas, but I didn't really do it on VTXs. But that's how it goes sometimes. You look at some other people's content and you think, you know what, they did a great job on that. And Chris absolutely did. He really did. So, okay. I suppose we should get on the main title subject, which is TBS, Team Black Sheep. Now, I've put a video out today on this, and I'm not going to go over it in this too much, but if you haven't seen it, there is a live stream that has been released by TBS where they talk about the problems they had for the last few years. Trappy really does go into quite a lot of detail about what has been going on. So let me just bring it up here. It is, and I do have a dedicated video on this today because I felt it warranted it. Because it is important, because TBS are important in FPV, a hugely important company in FPV. Not only that, Trappy himself is a hugely important man in FPV. The man himself is like the grandfather of FPV in the sense of many of us who started, I started using TBS products in like 2013. I don't know when I bought my TBS Discovery. I've got a monster TBS Discovery over there with extended arms. I can't remember when TBS started, but 13, 14. Look, Trappy is a hugely important part of FPV, and as is TBS. And look, they've put out this rather candid video, TBS Couch Trip Down Memory Lane, where he talks about the struggles of the last few years, problems internally with management, problems with staff leaving, COVID, premises. And the basics of this all is TBS is now fully owned, as we understand it, by Trappy, and Trappy's going to be taking it forward. Trappy was the CEO before. So something just to note is that that hasn't changed. So you could argue the same man who has been in charge whilst they had all of these problems is the same man who's in charge today, but it really isn't as simple as that. But look, for me, I just wanted to sort of comment on how important TBS have been in FPV. And whilst they have stagnated, you know, there's a lot of burnt fingers with this. People who've been waiting for HTX on the Mambo. People who've been waiting for updates. People who've been wanting new products. People who haven't been able to buy products. The issues that have happened now and again with Crossfire. And look, let's be under no illusion. They have done an awful lot well. I still love the way when you bind Tracer or Crossfire that it looks at the firmware on the receiver, and if it isn't up to date, it just does it. That is as good as it gets. Everyone else should do that. ExpressLRS, everyone. There is no excuse. That is just as good as it gets. And look, I predominantly fly ExpressLRS these days. I either fly ExpressLRS or Crossfire. And the way they've got Crossfire set up in that method, it's just brilliant. It's hands down brilliant. I have, though, had issues with Crossfire. I had it where it kept losing bindings randomly on one of the receivers, just one. And the Mambo has been, and let me just put that there, the Mambo for me was a good radio, but it wasn't a great radio. And I have had issues on this. I had some real trouble with the gimbals. I had some real issues. The fact I didn't want to use a module. And look, let's be under no illusion. This exists, and this is my favorite radio. Hands down, my favorite radio. This exists because this created a market for it. Really. This radio created the market that this filled. In my opinion, the Boxer is better in every way than this radio. Every way, hands down. However, I would buy a Mambo that had Crossfire built in as my Crossfire radio. I absolutely would have a Mambo with Crossfire built in. Yeah, there are some other radios out there, GMI. Yeah, I think the easiest way... Look, I'm not saying they were first, because there's some very old radios that are similar to this out there as well. But this sort of exists because of that, is the simpler term to use. But this I would love with Crossfire. This, though, this radio is phenomenal. The Boxer, I'm sorry, it's just phenomenal. I got the AGO 1s on this, and I've also got, let me just turn that on. We have the LED rings as well, because we can is why we have the LED rings. And look, this radio is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. It is the best radio I've used. But that isn't to say TBS doesn't have a place. Now, I said something quite controversial in that video that it seems for some people. I said TBS should get rid of Tracer. I still firmly believe that. I think Tracer should be gone. I don't know if there's a market for Tracer anymore. Someone just asked, Crossfire versus ExpressLRS. For me, I prefer ExpressLRS in the 2.4 gig band. I absolutely prefer Crossfire in the 800, 900, simply because I prefer the hardware. I don't feel ExpressLRS manufacturers have really got on board with 900 megs hardware. There just isn't enough of it. Cool Cat, what's the point of Tracer in a world where ExpressLRS is here? The only thing to remember, though, is you still have the nice setup on Tracer. You still have the auto-updating firmware. As a turnkey solution, Tracer is much better than ExpressLRS. Let's not pretend that isn't the case. It's not as feature-rich. It's not as has all of the faster modes and all of it. However, Tracer is a much better out-the-box experience. Ease of use, just it works. Just like Crossfire. So there is a place for it. There is a place for it. But I would concentrate on Crossfire. Would you buy a Boxer ExpressLRS 900 internal or Crossfire Mambo? With the Boxer, I would always buy a 2.4 and shove a module in it. But I'm not against having a Mambo with Crossfire built in. I think the Mambo just should have been available in both versions for people. ExpressLRS is very good. The setup isn't quite as bad, I think, as a lot of people say, but it is a bit of a faff at times. Yeah. And I think the gimbals need to be better on this radio. Not the gimbals, the mag sensors. It's certainly not over for Tracer. Put it that way. But from my point of view, if you haven't seen the video, I would consider checking it out if you're interested. Me personally, I am really pleased that they're not gone. And it sounds like, I'll be honest, if you listen to the video, and Trappy has his video and they talk about it, it sounds like they were very close to no longer existing. Very, 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 very close to no longer existing. And he talks about that. And like, he doesn't put blame on people specifically and all of the mess with the ownership and all of this. They were clearly heavily hit by COVID. They lost staff. The management was all over the place. And I just hope now Trappy is in full control. They can, A, take the business forward, grow up a bit as a business. I think they need to grow up. I don't mean that the people. I just mean I want to see TBS acting like a big brand now. And they need to get out there. You know, it's all very well TBS doing these lounges, which is fantastic. And they have their Discord or their Facebook group, and they're very insular is the term I'd use. They don't actively communicate out into the community, especially with creators and stuff like that. I think Trappy's probably been burnt a bit in the past, and I think it's understandable because you had TBS and Trappy are inextricably linked. And Trappy might say something people don't like, or someone might say something and Trappy doesn't like. What we need is to have TBS as a business being promoted, and whether that's Trappy or somewhere else, and that's dealing with people like me, talking to those of us who make content. Look, here's a real interesting one. This is fact. This video that I made about TBS has been one of my best performing videos in the last few weeks. And at the moment, my channel's on its ass, so it's not getting views at the moment. I've upset the great algorithm. But the TBS video today is one of the best performing videos in the first 4 or 5 hours that I've had probably in the last month. So there is a huge amount of interest for TBS. There is a huge amount of interest in the brand, in the company. There are people who want to talk about it. I'd love to talk about TBS's new products when they come out. But brands have to work with us, people like me, to do that. If you're going to rely on me waiting till it's announced, ordering it and talking about it, it may happen, but it may not. Because I might just say, I don't fancy spending 100 quid on that. I'll go and look at something else that is interesting me. Now, please don't mistake this comment as saying, I want you to send me products for free. I don't care if I get to keep the product. I'll quite happily send it back to you. But if you want the promotion, you've got to start talking to people so they can see the product, try the product, and talk about it and get that info into the community. And that's what we need to see from TBS again, because I don't know anyone they work with, and I could be wrong. They may work, you got the Ethics brand of stuff and thing, but I always like making content, and others like making content on new products. We are a necessary evil, and I'm not saying we're important. Me, Bardwell's the king of this. But you need to be dealing with people and putting the products in their hands so they can talk about it. Because if they're not, if you're going to rely on me to order everything I see, it's not going to happen. And that's not to say I'm not interested in it, but I see something new come out and I think, you know what? I think the community would like to see that. I then go and order it and pay for it and wait for it to come in. But there's another 10 products that are doing that every week. So where do I look at and I think, oh, well, that's interesting. Do I want to order in that new 5-watt VTX for analog? Or do I want to order in that new TBS receiver? Or do I think it's if you're going to rely on me to do it, you're possibly going to get missed out unless you're DJI Avatar. And you need to get back up to them. Look, if Cadex, DJI, or HDZero release a product, I'll be all over it on day one as much as I can. Okay, that's digital FPV. That's my world. I'm not going to make a video with every ExpressLRS receivers. But if there's something big and new, I'm definitely going to try and talk about it. TBS have fallen below on that radar. And as a result, they now need to get themselves back up. That when TBS release something, the people like me go, I'm going to order that in because my community is going to want to hear about that. And I'll be honest, based on the numbers I've seen on this video, there's a lot of interest for TBS gear. So we need to do that. People want to know about this brand. It's an important brand in FPV. Genuinely, I want to see it succeed. I have a place in my heart for TBS. And I never for 1 minute wanted to see them disappear. And I hope this is the beginning of a new chapter for them, TBS 2.0. But they need to grow up a bit as a company. They need to get involved. They need to get some bloody products out there. It's as simple as that. So that's my TBS rant. Now I'm going to come back to the chat and I need to check my Discord because I haven't looked at it yet. Okay, no one's posted there. That's good. ExpressLRS has changed the way I fly in the big city of New York. All good for me, 100%. Pepmin Pilot, not a big TBS user, but what I have is really good quality. Absolutely. Their hardware has always been really good. Cool Cat, you're doing okay, Ian. You've got 150 dedicated watching, and they're always going to be a market for good reviews. No BS, honest reviews. Yeah, I appreciate that. Actually, that's a problem I've had recently. I haven't actually reviewed anything that's crap for ages. FPV's getting a bit of a problem that everything's actually okay. I really like you choose what to report on, and this is what makes you one of the best. Yeah, and thank you for that, and I do appreciate it. My sort of point with that is, it's not for me about receiving a product for free. The problem is, if you leave it to me to remember everything, it's really hard. You know, there's so much that comes out. I've got to sort of go, oh yeah, I want that, or oh yeah, I want that, or oh yeah, I want that, or no, people might be interested in that. Louis, isn't the interest for TBS the same as people stopping to look at a car crash? That's a harsh comment. Oh, that's harsh. Might be true, but that's harsh. Oh, man. That's bad. That's bad. Right, before I forget, I want to say a massive thank you to What's Up for the $5 super chat. You are a friend, Dave. You're an amazing bloke, and I do appreciate it, my friend. I really do. Shots fired. Wow. Moved on for TBS a while ago. Don't care for Trappy's attitude. Yeah, and look, that is a problem. When you have someone who makes products but is also as vocal and as out there and as... Look, Trappy says what he thinks, agree with it or don't agree with it. But that also then can have an effect too. It's that Musk factor, isn't it? Yeah, it's interesting. But genuinely, from me, I hope we need them in FPV. And look, I think as someone who looks at products, I've got to keep a closer eye on what TBS are doing. That's for sure. Is 950 megs only allowed in the US region too, not in the UK? So in UK, we use 868, and in the US, we use 900. So these modules, I'm trying to pick mine up. These will do both. This will do 868 and 900. So you just select the band depending on your region. The antenna is tuned for both. At those frequencies, they don't worry about it too much. Yeah, I'd have gone for a Mamba with a built-in Crossfire. I think a lot of people would have gone for a Mamba with a built-in Crossfire. TBS ExpressLRS would help them. Yeah, it's a tough one. Tango 2 is by far the biggest success story they have. By far. By far. You know, and actually, it's a radio I've used once or twice. I've not got a lot of experience with a Tango 2, but I don't actually have one. Is it in stock at the moment? And this has been another problem. You couldn't even buy the stuff. But let's just get past that T-motor. TBS. Team Black Sheep. Let's just have a look at what's in stock at the moment. Shop. Their website is definitely a bit clunky. So the Tango 2 is on pre-order and the Tango 2 Pro is on pre-order at the moment. Can you get any in the UK, I wonder? Can I get any Tango 2 Pros in the UK? Let's just have a look. I know that people have been struggling to get stock. Oh, yeah, so I can get a Tango 2 Pro in the UK. It is available. And they're out of stock unmanned. So they are around. Tango 2 Pro, USA. What about Get FPV in the others? Get FPV. Back ordered. Okay. My Tango 2 was excellent. Yeah, I believe it's a very, very good radio. Loves Trappy and TBS. Hope they get themselves sorted. Genuinely, yeah, I say the same. TBS need to dive into digital video. Yeah, very interesting subject. Look, I'm not convinced TBS need to make a digital FPV system. I think that's beyond them. And that's no slight on their people. That's no slight on them. That is a very, very, very big task. And before anyone says, well, Cadex did it. No, they didn't. Cadex bought an off-the-shelf solution and modified it for FPV. Look, be under no illusion of that. The Cadex system is an artisan chipset based on an SDK, based on something that existed already in China. They didn't develop that. It was modified for use in FPV. It's largely based off what DJI had done in the past. So, look, Cadex didn't make a digital FPV system. Two people have made digital FPV systems, DJI and HDZero. And that is something people do need to fundamentally understand. Two people have made digital FPV, DJI, HDZero. As much as people talk about Carl and how HDZero doesn't have great image quality, HDZero is the only other company to make a digital FPV system. Period. And that in itself is a miracle. I could borrow your Tango too. They need to make HDZero VTXs. I think it's interesting, but here is a problem. There is already lots of complaints on the HDZero Facebook pages of the pricing. And let's be open, HDZero VTX pricing is not that high. Yet that community is already complaining about the pricing. They've been complaining for a long time about the pricing. People want cheaper and cheaper. And there is an issue here that this racing community is sort of not the high-end paying community. The racing community is either sponsored or it's people trying to do it for as cheap as they can because they're smashing them up all of the time. The cinematic community is the one with a bit of coin. So whilst HDZero makes sense as a company that would sell a chipset, what can TBS bring to the table? They could make a Unify digital, but why? What's it going to do? You got a tiny receiver and a VTX. I don't really see the benefit for them on that. I don't see it. Now, could they partner up with Cadex and do something? Potentially. That would be very interesting. And actually, here is a real interesting thing to start thinking about is the brands, those two coming together, not ownership, but TBS and Cadex Walksnail. That's pretty heavyweight. And that could really deliver some interesting products for people. I think that is a bigger mix than HDZero. I think the problem with the HDZero market is that people are already complaining about the price. I'm not really seeing that in the other side. And also, I think TBS could do a much better job than Cadex have on the RF front end on the Avatar system. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do HDZero. I just struggle to see the benefit. TBS and Orqa, I don't really see it because Orqa have got nothing to bring, really, as far as I'm aware. But so what does that leave for TBS? Well, it leaves analog and it leaves receivers. So what could we do with analog? Well, we could do better analog. Analog HD. There are products out there that exist. Could TBS be the company to really push that forward? There is analog HD out there. It does exist. The reason it's not largely been popular is it's somewhat licensed and it's very complicated, as I understand it, and it's been used in CCTV for years. It's around, it exists. It's not impossible. It's not out there in FPV, but as a technology, it exists. It's just not been widely pushed. It was a bit like HD VHS, for those who remembers this. And it's a complicated situation. I don't even know how many chipsets are out there for it. But could they do something? Potentially. I don't know. I'm just spitballing on this. Bandwidth is probably huge. Yeah, but people will take it. Like, it's not going to be used for racing, but people will take it for better image quality. The other question sort of is, could they just make the best analog there is? Deal with Runcam and make some of the very best analog cameras, make the very best VTXs, and be the pinnacle of analog. That might be their future. Connex HD system also back in 2016. Yes, we had them. That's a point. I did forget about Connex. It didn't really work very well, though, did it? Island X FPV. So Artisan has a dev kit. They have a dev kit that's available to buy. Artisan is a complicated situation because Artisan have their chipset. Artisan have a relationship that dates right back with DJI. We have some hypotheses, and I have discussed this in a blog post on... Actually, I have a video on this. I do have a video on the history of DJI OcuSync. And this has a lot in it about this. DJI have worked... OcuSync the story so far. So that video there, if you haven't seen it, it's worth a look. I go into quite some depth about... That only had 5,000 views. That's just shocking. That's a great video. If you want to know everything about OcuSync, go watch that video. But DJI have worked with Artisan in the past. We think Artisan even had a hand in helping DJI with the current P1 chipset. I'm not saying they made it for them, but we believe they may have had a hand in it. And then what seems to be the case is the learnings from that, or some of the same IP from that, they've then been able to take off themselves and develop into the chipset they're now using. You have to remember, the DJI chipset is nothing special. It is basically an ARM chipset with an LTE baseband. That is it. It has some very specific layouts, but it is an ARM chipset with an LTE front end. The real magic is what DJI have been allowed to do on that LTE baseband. So, for instance, there are off-the-shelf chipsets out there today by Snapdragon, by others, that could do what DJI are doing. The only reason you can't is because Snapdragon and others don't give you the low-level baseband access to the LTE DSP to allow you to be able to do what DJI are doing. The hardware for DJI is really not special. What is special is that DJI have been given crazy low-level access to the DSP in the LTE baseband. And that has meant they have been able to completely customize it to what we have today. And that's why when they first started with OcuSync, they didn't even have their own custom chipset. They were using the off-the-shelf lead core chipset which is very similar to the P1 that we have today. Maybe it was the other way around. No, Artisan have been involved with DJI for years. So Artisan actually made some of the chipsets for Lightbridge. So DJI actually worked with Artisan, and Artisan made the chipsets in Lightbridge in the Inspire 1. Their chipsets are in there. They go back a very long way together, on and off. Now, the problem with LTE is it's a heavily licensed and proprietary technology that... So if we take Snapdragon, they have their cores and they have their LTE baseband, which they will program it to do what you want to do, but they don't give that low-level access out. That's why you just don't see it in Europe. You know, I've spoken to some people in the background who've been trying to do what DJI are doing for years, and it's not about money, it's not about access, it's about LTE IP is hugely guarded by a very small number of people. And for those who've been watching in the background, there's been a whole host of arguments between Apple, for instance, and Snapdragon and others because they've not been given access to the same LTE basebands. And this is a very complicated thing. But the real key to this, and when we look at DJI and how this all spread, was a Chinese company called Leadcore started making smartphone chipsets in about 2014. Those chipsets then licensed LTE cores from Seva, the cores, the DSPs, and that seems to have filtered out as Leadcore have gone under and vanished, and suddenly that IP seems to have filtered out into other areas in the DJI FPV and others. And it's a case that they've basically gained access to this IP and sort of ran with it. And now we don't know if that's legitimate or not. That's a whole other question. You have to remember, okay, so the thing to understand about LTE, just someone asked it, one, I can't say his name. If it's on 2.4, what is the LTE part? LTE is not a frequency. It's an encoding type. Snapdragon, Qualcomm, yeah, all of them. Yeah, Qualcomm, not Snapdragon. Yeah, Qualcomm. Remember, LTE is a communication protocol, not a frequency. We have full dual RF, TX and RX. I'm ready to beam steering in RC link, video link. Very cool, Captain Bry. OFDMA is just a modulation type. You have to remember there is very low level algorithms involved that define the whole radio, how it behaves, how it transmits, what it transmits, in the sense of, yes, the protocols, the QAM, the OFDM types, all of that changes as the signal changes, but you have to, the overall algorithm. Why use LTE for video, though? LTE is just a communication protocol. So an LTE is about getting the data from point A to point B. So everything before LTE didn't do it good enough. HearLink is based on LTE. So for those who don't know, HearLink, the digital system, that's based on LTE. It's a protocol. Think of it like H.264 or H.265. We wouldn't have streaming today without H.264 and H.265. And I mean streaming, I mean being able to watch videos on Netflix and all of these. These codecs, that's really what LTE is. It's a way of moving the data in a reliable method. That's what was missing in FPV. And if you actually look at, okay, the fundamental difference between HDZero and the other systems is that element. HDZero is not a protocol using LTE. It's not using anything normal. It's a completely, I'm not going to say Carl created it. It's called joint channel source coding. I think it's joint channel source coding off the top of my head. It's an entirely different way of breaking that data up. But the thing to understand is this. Digital video is taking an image, splitting that image up into trying to get that image as small as you can, transmitting that over the air, rebuilding that image, and bringing back as much data as you can. Okay? So digital video is really simple. Take the image, break it down, and try and make it as small as you can. Transmit it. The smaller it is, the faster you can transmit it. To get it into the other side, recombine that data, create the image. Now, the more steps there are in each of these processors on each side, the longer the latency. So if you imagine there is two types of encoding in digital video wireless. So you have the initial compression encoding in DJI, which takes the image and tries to break it down and make it as small as possible. And then you've got a second stage of encoding for forward error correction over the wireless link. Because remember, not all of the data you're going to put into the wireless link on this side is going to come out at this side. And there is a point then where you need to be able to recover or at least rebuild the image with the missing data. So the first thing you've got is you take the image and you remove all of the data you don't need. What's not changed? What don't I need to make the image as small as possible? Then you've got the second stage of the pipeline, which is, right, of that data we've now compressed, I now need to add in error correction, which means if any of it, some of it doesn't make it to the other side, the system on the other side is able to look at what's missing and try and recover it. Now, that is obviously to a point, but it still needs to happen. So every stage of the process takes up time and latency. Carl doesn't do that. HDZero doesn't do that. We don't fully understand how it works, but what it doesn't have is those two stages of encoding and decoding on either side. HDZero takes the image, it uses an algorithm to split that image down, and it streams that image data basically line by line over the air. So rather than take a whole image, compress it, remove the bits you don't need, send it over the air, send it into the RF front end, readjust it so you've got error correction, compress it again and send it wirelessly, Carl is taking the image, breaking it down, removing the bits he doesn't need, streaming that into the transceiver, streaming that over the air, and bringing it in the other side. It is very different the way they work. And that's why HDZero breaks up differently, because when you miss a piece of data, you're actually missing a pixel of data. And that's what you're missing. And that's why HDZero looks like analog when it breaks up, because you're not missing like a chunk of data. Because you've got to remember, in digital, you're compressing the image, removing all of the data you don't need, removing the bits you don't want, and then pushing that into error correction, and then pushing that over the air. But if there are bits of it missing on the other end, it's not like, oh, you're missing the data for that one pixel. That block of data that may be only consisting of 60% of what it needs to be able to rebuild it could contain all different parts of the image. And that's why when DJI break up, it's not like the same, necessarily in the same area. You can get breakup down here and breakup up there, or you can get it blocked there and do there. And they do use various technologies as area of interest in DJI, so that's why you get focus mode is actually called area of interest, so you push the data rate, so it encodes different parts of the images separately, and it allows it to then send that as part of that and then rebuild it. I could end it down this rabbit hole forever, but they are very different in the way they work, and I've forgotten where I was going with this now. So it's an extremely complicated subject. I've lost my train of thought. Just catching down, sampling the stuff. Yeah. Digital is just sampling and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. How did we get up here? DJI, Artisan, and HDZero. In the end, we basically have two digital FPV systems, DJI and HDZero. Avatar is basically a copy of the way DJI do it. I'm not saying it's a copy system, but it's the same thing. But what you have to understand is they're not... Avatar didn't actually make it. And as for TBS, let's hope they do something. OpenHD, yes, another protocol. Again, OpenHD is based on the Wi-Fi protocol. So think of LTE as a protocol. HDZero has been based on Wi-Fi. Not HDZero, OpenHD, but that has been going through a complete rewrite, and I need to go and have a look at what that's doing. But it was based on a Wi-Fi protocol. So you're just sending data over Wi-Fi. And one of the biggest problems with the Wi-Fi protocol, for instance, is something called packet acknowledgement. So, for instance, in Wi-Fi, you send a piece of data, and then there's an acknowledgement that data has been received and is valid. Mike Bergman, do I know why O3 will show a compass interference error? O3, or do you mean the Avata? O3 should not show that error. Goggles 2 will. O3 won't, but Goggles 2 will. Recalibrate your Goggles 2 if you're using Goggles 2. Will the O3 VTX antenna work with HDZero VTX? Yes, but why would you? Because it's 2 versus 1. HDZero only has a single output. And I wouldn't use the DJI O3 antenna. It's not that good. Do Goggles 2 have GPS? No, they don't. The Integras do, but the Goggles 2 do not. Yeah, Goggles 2, recalibrate. There's a compass in the goggle. It's easy to confuse it for a compass in the aircraft. Okay. I ended up on a hell of a rabbit hole. That ended weirdly. That really did end weirdly. Can the Pavo Pico O3 antenna be used on a regular quad? What is the Pavo Pico O3? Not seen that. I was getting transmission interference due to a brush mode. It can happen. What's the Pavo Pico 3? That doesn't ring a bell for me. Ah, it's a Whoop. Ah, right, wait a minute. So the question is, yes, but I wouldn't want to. Those little antennas are not very good. O3 is low-powered and higher definition. It's a different scenario. O3 is just different. Different codec, different behavior. You know, the thing to understand with O3 is it's nothing magical from the original FPV system. There's just more horsepower in it, more processing, better camera, better video. Slightly higher latency. Okay, so before we move on, I'll just answer a few more questions. If you got any, put them in the chat. Using O3 and the V2 goggles, I got battery firmware mismatch. Got a battery firmware mismatch warning. What would that be? Well, that would usually be on the Avata drone. That's weird. That's a real weird error. I'd ignore it. That's a DJI bug. You shouldn't be getting that. Battery firmware mismatch error is usually on one of their ready-to-fly quads when the firmware on their smart battery doesn't align with the quad. Moore's Law. Always Moore's Law. The O3 encodes the image differently, but the baseband LTE... Yeah, O3 it's the same chipset overall. They've just added another chipset for the video encoding and a new protocol. It has been reworked, but there's nothing magically new with O3. Was getting it using DJI FPV when buying new... Ah, yes, you'll get that with like the FPV drones when buying new batteries. It'll just say battery firmware mismatch, and usually it just gives you an option to update the firmware. Do I have a favourite M10? I've only got two here. They're both okay. I've got the Flyfish RC, and I've got one from... Flyfish RC and I forgot what they're called. What are they called? Flywheel. And they're both okay. Quad City Bay Area. Do you think Walksnail limitations versus DJI hardware or engineers? Engineers. The hardware, it's arguable. The Avatar hardware sits between the original FPV system and O3. It's not as good as O3, but it's more capable than the original FPV system. The difference is the software, the algorithm, the testing. Avatar's RF front end is very basic. Something I have discussed before. I think I mentioned it in one of the videos, and I was talking to Junus about this last week as well. The Avatar system's RF front end is a lot more basic than DJI's, and I think that doesn't help their system either. Less filtering. I don't know what it's matched like, but it's a far simpler setup on the RF front end. But thank you, Quad Basic Area. Thank you for the $5 super chat. That's incredible. Thank you for that. I could eat a burger now. So could I. Okay. We're going to talk, and this is going to be a controversial subject. We're going to talk about remote ID and spoofing. Now, I did put a video out on remote ID this week because I kept getting people asking about my thoughts on it, and I thought I'll put something out. Now, interestingly... let me just go to the desktop. JB put a video out this week. And I've lost it now. I had it and it's gone. Typical. Considering I watch JB, YouTube never brings it up for me. So JB put out a video this week on how to spoof remote ID. Now, I'll be honest, I was a little surprised he's put this out, but also just so fast. But look, it's the flavor of the month, so everyone wants to talk about it. Let's be realistic. You know, you've got everyone wants to highlight this. Everyone wants to talk about it. And look, let's not pretend it's getting decent views, so creators are going to be making videos on it. I don't intend to make too many more in the future, but not in the near future, put it that way. But yeah, JB put a video out on it, and it is super interesting. It's going over it. Now, for me, there's 2 points to this I want to talk about, and we're going to look at the subjects, and actually, we're going to look at this as well, because I've actually installed it onto this. This is a Happy Model ExpressLRS transmitter, but because it's running an ESP32, I can use this as one of the spoofers because it's got a built-in antenna. I can just flash it as an ESP32, and it works. It's fine. We can do it. Nice and easy. But I also want to talk about the subject of it because I don't fully understand people's interest in this, because look, remote ID is coming, okay? So from a legislation point of view, in certain countries in the world, it will be a legal requirement to have remote ID. Now, people have a choice. We'll have the law. You then will read the law, understand the law, and make a personal choice on if you're going to comply with that law or not. That's down to each individual person to make a decision based on the consequences, just like speeding, just like anything else. And I actually don't personally think it's quite as black and white as that, because if you're someone who's flying at like a flight site with lots of people and there's a club there, you might want to comply with remote ID. But if you're someone who's climbing a fence to get into that abandoned power station that you're going to fly as a bando, well, you're not really meant to be in there anyway. So the last thing you're going to do is put remote ID on your quad. So I don't even think it's as black and white as everyone will or won't. I even think there will be people who make the choice of having one quad with it on and one quad with it off and stuff like that. But the spoofing thing is quite interesting because some way, I don't get the point other than it being just to cause a bit of trouble, in the sense of people wanting to spoof to make it look like there's loads of other drones there. Because from my point of view, there is absolute logic in having remote ID, but with, say, a fake home point. That, I think, is absolutely reasonable in the sense of I can see people doing that. So they want to fly with remote ID, so they're technically complying, but the home point isn't right because they don't want people to turn up and find them. I can also see some people wanting to fly with incorrect data is the term I'll use. I'm not going to say someone else's data because we wouldn't want that, but incorrect data. But the bit I don't really get is spoofing with like 10 drones, because I just don't get the point of that. It's just a bit weird, that element of it. The people talking about, you know, let's spoof it and have it so there's 30 craft in the air. Yeah, but why? Surely you just either fly with it or without and get on with your life. I don't quite get the spoofing bit. Now, it's super interesting from a technical standpoint, and we all like to have a play with stuff and do stuff like that. However, I'm not quite sure on this huge amount of interest of let's make it look like it's dull, because I'll be honest, spoofing it to 99% of people is just going to make them think there's 10 drones in the air. I'm not sure anyone will care. You know, a Karen spoofer, someone just said, just need a Karen spoofer. I'm not sure you're going to see that many people who are interested in this. Yeah, are there going to be scenarios where someone wants to make it look like there's 10 quads in the air? I get that. But I also don't fully understand the overall interest in it. But nonetheless, it is rather interesting. Now, there are obviously now two projects. We had the original project, which is the one JB showed, which is a remote ID spoofer. And this works on an ESP. It's not actually an ESP32. This works, which is a bit frustrating. I was hoping this worked on an ESP32, but it doesn't. This actually works on a ESP8266 chipset. And JB showed you that one in the video. We now, though, have this other one, which is Squidward. Now, this one actually runs on an ESP32, and that's why I've been able to flash this onto the ExpressLRS transmitter. Now, just to be clear up front, this is only running that. It's not running ExpressLRS right now. However, ExpressLRS will have a solution coming in the future. Whether that is actually certified or not is another question. But this is, I'm just using this as an ESP32. That's what I'm using this as. Now, I have already flashed this, and I flashed it with the Arduino IDE, and that's fairly straightforward. The process is exactly the same for both of them. And then at the moment, it's basically using that as RID. So if I just plug this in a minute, just to show you guys this. I'm going to plug it into USB just to power it. That's all. Here we go. Let me just find a phone. Now, for some reason, the app on my iPhone doesn't work. It just closes instantly. However, on Android, the RID scanner works absolutely fine. Let me just scroll out a little bit. And you can see that it's now picked up. Let me just find that drone in the US. And you can see it's picked up that aircraft. Let me just cough a minute. Sorry about that. Let me just zoom that out on the map. You can now see that it's picked up that quad there. There's a Mavic 3 Cine down there as well, look. And that's coming directly from this ESP32. Now, this app is called Drone Scanner. Now, it is available on Android and iOS, but it isn't working on iOS for me. It just closes instantly. Now, what I wanted to actually show you on this is the RF packets, because we can actually see this with my Spectrum Analyzer. So I'm just going to put the input to my analyzer in here, because this is on very low power mode. The antenna's in there. I'm not putting an antenna on it. I'm just going to do it very, very basically. And what I'm going to do is just open up the app. Now, this app does chew quite a bit of processing power, so I'm going to try not to crash the computer at the same time on this, because this thing is running that. Right. 2 seconds, and we're going to go to the desktop view. There we go. Now, what you're seeing here, and what we're going to do is change the profile. We're going to change it to Bluetooth, which we're on at the moment. And then what I'm going to do is change us to 184 megahertz bandwidth. I'm going to take the signal down a little bit, and I'm going to show you the RFID packets. Now, let me just put that right to there. Them there, you can see these spikes. Now, if I actually go to the histogram view, you can see them there now. So, these spikes that you can see there, and let me just... This one, and this one are the remote ID packets. Ignore this lump here in the middle. This is the my Wi-Fi in the building is what that is. But these here are the remote ID pulses and the packets of data being sent over the air. Now we can look at them on the Spectrum view as well, and if I put on max hold, you'll see them then appear there. And you can see that is those packets appearing there, there, and there from the ESP32. Because it doesn't have an external antenna, you can't really see much. But I did just want to show you the packets themselves that are being transmitted. And as I've said, if we look on the waterfall view is the better way for me to show this to you. So it's those ones there, those ones there, and those ones there. And you can then actually see the pulses between the packets that are being transmitted. So again, you can see the pulses of data being sent on each of the frequencies. Now, as I've said, this in the middle is my Wi-Fi. But if we just pause this a minute, you could then see those packets aligning. So that's the remote ID packets all being transmitted down there. And again, mirrored across all three frequencies. So you can see they're identical across all three being transmitted. Now, obviously, the interesting thing about this is it's basically a Bluetooth protocol. It's nothing particularly special. But what's going to be really interesting is looking at these on the DJI systems, and that's what I'm planning to do next. And that is what we're going to be using to base some of the RID analysis on. Now, let me just close the spectrum analyzer because I don't want it to suck away all of the power. Now, the interesting thing about this software on the ESP32 is you can actually use a web interface with this. They have this web interface set up for this. So once you flashed it, you can connect it. So I can connect it, 13. And you can then actually configure this via this software. So if I zoom out a minute, you can see now that it's showing that there. But I can go into the profile on this and I can actually set all of the details on here for the remote ID. So I can actually call it something, change the name on it, and fake even the name of the remote ID device. So for instance, I can go into the profile, I can call serial number, and I can go Mads drone. One, two, three, and then we're going to go helicopter, and then we're going to go operator, Mads tech, description, FPV drone, and then I can apply those settings and then synchronize, and that will now appear on here. So now I can open the scanner app. 2 seconds. Let me just reopen it. And if we now look on the scanner app, we'll give it a second. If I've done this right, let me just tell it to fly. There we go. We'll give it a second. Wait for this. We should then see the details change in a minute. It still thinks it's a UVonics ping. Let me just check. Ah, yeah, no, what it's done is it's resynced the old data. So 1 second, let me just change this. So I'm going to change it now to Mads Tech. I'm going to change the remote ID to 12345 Mad RC. Hit apply. Hit cancel. Hit synchronize. And then in a minute, we should see the name of that actually change because I've changed it in the app. And again, there we go. We can see it's changed to Mads Tech. And you can see we have the ability to actually customize the remote ID data that's being transmitted from the ESP32. Now, I'll probably do a video on the ExpressLRS one of this just because I think it's quite interesting. Because you don't have to order an ESP32 if you've got one. There's nothing particularly special about this. It's just a normal ExpressLRS transmitter. The ExpressLRS is going to be interesting when they integrate it, and I think that is going to give people a lot of options with regards to having remote ID built in with ExpressLRS. The bit I don't fully get on this, and this is the bit that I still think is unknown, is how this is all going to work out, because you're going to buy a module that you're going to register, and that data then has to go into a database, and that's how they'll know who you are, or the serial number of the device will come from a database. I still think there's loads of holes in this. But look, having a remote ID device is going to be possible for $10, right? $10, $12. The actual hardware is, the cost is minuscule. What's going to be in the background is the administration of all of that other stuff. There's going to be a load of people who will be able to buy remote ID modules on AliExpress who think they're compliant, put it on their drone and go, there you go, I'm done. And I doubt they'll have problems. 99% of people won't know that it's wrong. It's only going to be in a situation where the police or the authorities or someone needs to look at it specifically, then it might have a problem. But yeah, I just don't fully understand the spoofing bit. For me, I think what you're going to see is people who want to sort of comply at minimum. So they don't want their home point transmitted. They'll put a fake home point in. They'll integrate it into one of their quads and not all of them. But I still don't see how the administration of this is going to be possible. It doesn't make sense to me. That bit of it seems insane. And I've just seen Captain Bry's comment, truth. The administration and compliance is what will drive the cost. The hardware we already have. Yeah, exactly. We can do this tomorrow. But yeah, spoofing is interesting. I'm intrigued at just how popular the spoofing element has been. And look, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of talking about people doing stuff they shouldn't. Look, let's not do anything silly. Comply, don't comply. Let's get on with our lives. We don't need to be causing problems for other aircraft, let's just say. Do not manipulate any signals just by using it. You have... I can't read it from here. Consented. Manipulating the device is a felony. Non-compliance is non-compliance. Yeah. It's either compliant or non-compliant. But again, this is going to be about each person making their own decision. At the end of the day, we're all grown-ups. People have a choice. Read the law, understand it, make a decision, get on with your life. It's as simple as that. I don't really see the huge fuss around, putting 12 signals out when you're flying. I don't really see the point of it. For me, it's really simple. There's no point putting 12 signals out. You may as well just not transmit. It's easier. You don't need the hardware. You don't need the hassle. As for how the enforcement's going to go, I just don't understand how it's going to be possible. Will somebody be done? Absolutely. Will there be some test cases? Damn right. They're going to nail someone. Absolutely, they're going to nail a few people. But like everything, look, the police in this country can't even turn up if you have your house broken into. Yeah, Rick, and I can't condone that, and I'm not even going to mention it. I just don't think that's going to help anyone. They will only nail Bot Grinder and Bardwell. I was a little surprised JB put that video out. Genuinely. I'm not saying a bad thing. I just thought, not sure I'd have gone there. I'm not sure. If Bruce had done it, it would have been from where he is, and it's a different scenario. It's... Is it just Bluetooth or Wi-Fi? It's basically both, but it's basically Bluetooth LE. Bardwell is a star man. Bardwell is a good guy. But it's a brave move. But let's see what happens. It's a brave move being the first. And let's see how interested they are in that, They won't. And that's the key. And look, I am going to be, when it comes to compliance and showing how I'm going to be building my drones as resilient as possible, a new thing I'm going to be doing, actually, with a lot of the electronics in some of my heavier damageable quads, the ones that I feel I might damage, I'm going to be making sure that my flight controller and ESC are very protected. And actually, that expensive RID module, I'm going to want to make sure that there's no way I can damage it. And I want to probably thinking about, to make sure I can't damage the antenna on it, I want to get one with a built-in antenna. And then to ensure that I can't damage the board, I'm thinking that you want to mount it in like a small aluminium casing and probably pot it in that casing as well with epoxy resin. And just for electronic safety, you're going to need to make sure that the outside of that fully aluminium encased casing is grounded as well to make sure that there's no possibility of a short. And there's going to be other methods, I'm going to want to do things like make sure that, for the really small modules, to offer the best protection, it's going to be like some stainless steel sort of wrapping to make sure that it can't be penetrated and making sure that all of the ends are sealed. Possibly copper, so wrap it in Kapton tape to protect the module, and then like some copper braid that you can solder so you can make sure that the module can't fall out and get damaged. And again, because that's metal braid, you're going to make sure that you're going to ground it. Make sure you ground it because you cannot risk getting an electric shock off that module. So that way, when I'm compliant, I'm going to know no matter how hard I crash that quad, there's no way that module is going to get hurt. There's no way that module is going to accidentally get damaged in flight, with a bird attack or some form of, fly making it through the casing and damaging the components on the board at high speed. All of these things are a possibility. So I'm going to want to make sure that it is as protected as possible, because I have a responsibility to ensure that that module is working inside whatever casing. Fly strike, you've got to be careful. Fly strikes, lightning, you've really got to be careful about lightning as well. This module is transmitting. I wouldn't want it to attract a lightning strike. So we're going to need to make sure it's grounded as well. There's a lot of thought's going to need to go into making sure these modules are protected, because we want to make sure that we're compliant. I think Catfather lead's probably a bit heavy. I think like a good copper weave mesh. Lightning strike. Yeah, we're going to have to be careful of a lightning strike on it. Protected from hammer strike. There's... Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. You don't want to miswire it. No. You could argue to prevent miswiring the module, I'm not going to connect it up. Jason Black's nail on. To prevent the risk of me damaging it while powering on, I'm just not going to plug it in. Protect it against EMP. You know what? You need to keep that. That is another thing. That is an absolute... there's a video coming on this. Thick current load protection. Yeah. We're going to need to make sure that the module is well protected and can't get damaged. Yeah. EMP as well. Do you know what? EMP, that's a crack. It's EMP. We're going to have to come up with EMP, lightning protection, damage protection, moisture protection, dust resistance, and protection from harmful sunlight rays as well. You know, there's a lot to do here before we can ensure we're fully compliant. Lipo fire, you know, obviously we're going to have to protect against a lipo fire in flight. 6S XT60. Wind Jumble FPV. I tend to go with what's on the battery. Whatever's on your back, protect your bank account. Don't buy one. Tend to go with 12 AWG. 10's quite thick. 12 is usually all right. I think you should do a video about EMP. 10 or 12, I usually go with. It is basic due diligence for your remote ID module. You absolutely need basic due diligence for your remote ID module. 14's a bit easier to work with. Yeah, 12 is thick. 12 is thick. 12's a pain in the ass. 14's a bit easier. I hope there is someone taking this seriously. I will be making a video on how to protect your remote ID module. You heard it here first, folks. And look, we will be talking about subjects like EMP. You know, on this channel, I talk about technical content. We talk about building drones and using digital FPV systems, and we will be talking about another wireless system, which is remote ID, and I'm going to be showing you how to ensure that you have installed the module correctly, but then you've protected that investment. You need to make sure that you've protected it from the likes of a lipo fire in flight, EMP, sunlight effect on the module, and there are a number of things that we're going to be going through, including lightning protection, because that's another real important one. Remember, your quad is flying very high up in the air, and you don't want any penetration damage from low-flying birds, flies coming in at speed as well, and we're going to be talking about that in a future video on this channel. And if you want to make sure that you do get the most important data on being able to ensure that you do remain compliant, please do make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I'm going to cut that and put that on the channel. How would ExpressLRS get FCC ID? Well, it's not. This is going to be the problem. Look, the compliance, ExpressLRS are going to put something in place for hopefully people, but is it compliant? Who knows? Insect collision damage. I like that. Right. We're going to have questions for a couple of minutes before I wrap this one up. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone for the stream tonight. I want to say a thank you for the super chats. We had David and What's Up and Quad City Bay Area. Thank you for them. Now, before I do it, I'm going to just quickly say, for those of you who don't know, I do have a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the channel, please do consider checking it out. There is a link in the description. I also have a Discord server as well. If you're interested in joining it, please also do check that out too. I want to say a massive thank you to all of my patrons. I would not be able to do that without their support. Since getting my Boxer recently, I have been more comfortable going further, flying around myself and out of bounds of the village park. What are the rules for flying over gardens, houses in the UK? No one owns the airspace, but you should remember you should stay 50 meters from people's property, persons, or anything else. Could be as low as 30 meters, depending on what aircraft you're flying, but you really should be 50 meters. But if you're sub 250, it gets a bit more complicated. What you've got to take into account is uninvolved persons. So if a house has an uninvolved person inside, you have to retain a distance from that. What you have to be more careful of is pissing off the neighbours. If you imagine you're flying low around someone's garden and a kid runs out the house unexpectedly and you fly into them, think of what will happen. Question. DJI O3 price reduction mentioned on JB's stream. What do I think? Yeah, someone somewhere has posted, and it was on Facebook or a Discord, that they've been told by someone in the know at DJI that there's a price reduction coming on O3. Now, I don't know anything about this, but I also wouldn't be shocked. It isn't unusual for DJI to reduce the price of something a little while after release, once they've got back their development costs, their tooling and others. I'll also say this. O3, in my opinion, has probably not sold particularly well. Whilst it has definitely been taken up by many of the bind and fly manufacturers as a standalone product, I genuinely don't think it's done that well, especially compared to the original system. I actually think DJI have underestimated Cadex's impact in the sale of the original FPV system. Cadex with the Vista really did push and promote the original FPV system, and whilst Cadex weren't selling the goggles, they were certainly banging out the Vistas and the air units, and they made some of the best cameras for it as well. The Nebula Pro is frankly brilliant, and I do think that after that partnership split up, and Cadex are still selling some air units and Vistas, not many now, I think DJI may have underestimated the push that Cadex had into the marketplace, and add to that the fact that O3 is not the best solution for freestyle FPV. It just isn't. The camera lens isn't replaceable. It is replaceable, but you can't get it. It isn't particularly cheap. It's expensive, and it doesn't replace your GoPro. It's good, but it isn't a direct GoPro replacement. There's no night cameras for it. There's a limited camera selection with only one, and O3 is just not the perfect solution. So as a result of this, I wouldn't be shocked to see a price drop, whether it be permanent or whether it be even a short period of time. I'm not convinced, though, it's going to be enough to make people jump in. What O3 needs today is more proper FPV cameras, not more DJIs. We want to see a Nebula Pro equivalent for the DJI O3 system with a standardized lens that people can replace. And then we want to see some more improvements to O3 with regards to its overall quirks, that low power mode fix, and maybe an air unit light. Maybe an air unit light. Another reworked Vista without the recording for people who want it. But I wouldn't be shocked, but I don't know if it's going to happen. I've not seen anything confirmed, so that's my thoughts. Oh, thank you for the $20 super chat. Just saying thanks, buddy, from across the pond. You answered most of my questions in your content. I appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate all you do. Thank you. I really appreciate that. O3 Vision 2 confirmed. If it hasn't sold well, yes. DJI will absolutely dump it and move on if it hasn't sold well. Because that's how they roll. Yeah, Cadex is sweet stuff. I got a Starlight right here and it's awesome. The Starlight camera from Cadex is very, very good. Price jump in November. Walksnail is going toward camera variety. Yeah, 100%. Walksnail are delivering variations on VTXs, variations on cameras, variations on receivers. What more do we want? You got decent goggles, you got a receiver module. You got various VTXs, Whoop, full size, and the V2. We've got a low light camera, a pro camera, then the standard camera. Walksnail are delivering what the community asked for, and there's more around the corner. Cadex is even doing a VTX with IR cam support. Yeah, 100%. Any good remote battery cutoff system? Save killing a battery and cooking a VTX in a crash. No, I have thought about this and there really isn't. They have a habit of welding shut, unfortunately. Right. I'm going to finish this one there. I want to say a thank you to everyone who's watched the stream tonight. Just reading on the chat. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Stay safe. Thank you for all the super chats. We'll be back again, same time, same place next week. And I will speak to you soon.